Marine biology is one of those careers where you are driven by passion. And on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, I'm going to be talking to marine biologist Kenzie Horton, who is here to talk about her drive and her passion and how it's become a huge part of her life and demonstrates it in her career as a marine biologist. She works for the state government in Florida. She is doing a master's at the same time on white sharks. She is doing science communication on TikTok to talk about everything surrounding marine biology and busting up those myths and giving you advice of what to wear and what not to wear while you're swimming in the ocean, i.e. do not wear a sequins bikini, because apparently that may or may not have been a thing. But she talks about a lot of stuff on today's episode, and we're going to find out by starting the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. I've got a very special guest today, Kenzie Horton, who is a marine biologist. I feel like she's been in the career for a while. She's been in the field for a while, and she's here to talk about her experience of how she got a job coming out of universities, the struggles that she had, but she's also here to talk about the passion that she has for marine biology, how she likes to educate people through science communication, how she's doing a master's and she wants to pursue academia, which you don't see a lot of people doing these days, but doing a PhD, becoming a professor, teaching, becoming an educator, it's all here. You have everything you need in, what to know about a marine biologist. Kenzie is that formula, and it is fun to learn her story, even stretching from her inspiration of her grandfather and his legacy and how that's come out in her passion for marine biology. It is a great episode. I can't wait for you to see the interview. So here's the interview with Kenzie Horton talking about her career in marine biology, science communication, and doing a master's. She is amazing. You're going to love the interview. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Kenzie, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about the ocean?
Yes, I'm really excited. Thank you for having me.
No problem. I am very excited as well. You've been on the bucket list for the podcast for quite some time since I discovered you on TikTok and your videos. It's been a real treat to get to know you through TikTok, but now we're really going to get to know each other through this podcast. And I'm very, very excited because I want the audience to know who you are as well. Hopefully they'll follow you on TikTok as well. And we get to see what you're doing on those videos, talking about sharks, talking about the ocean, making sure people are doing the right things when they swim and wearing the right things when they swim. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it and really talking about, the science communication that you're doing, but also you're doing something really special and it doesn't happen often. You're working full time in, the field of marine biology, but you're also doing graduate work in the field of marine biology at the same time. Kenzie, I don't know how you do it. We're going to find out today. I can't wait. Before we do, why don't you just let the audience know who you are and what you do?
Awesome. Yeah. So my name is Kenzie Horton. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission in Florida. But I also am a full-time grad student at Jacksonville University, where I study the movements of white sharks in their overwintering residency phase in the Carolinas region. So full-time work with fisheries biologists with the state agency, and as well as full-time work with Jacksonville University. But it's really unique because the FWC office that I work in is actually in the Marine Science Research Institute on JU's campus. So everything is in one building.
You have hit the perfect note there, because that is like you're able to do the work and do your master's at the same time, which I love. I think that's how you have to marry it, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's really the key so that you don't go crazy. You know what I mean? Like doing two separate projects is going to be very difficult. Having this, I think that's wonderful. We're going to dive into that. I want to get to know you a little bit more. We all marine biologists have a story of how we got into marine biology. I want to hear your story. I want the audience to hear your story because I've read a little bit about it. It's quite special. Can you just talk about, how you got interested? Like what was that factor that made you interested in the ocean?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm in Florida right now, but I was born and raised in Florida. I grew up in Orlando, so Central Florida, but every year my parents and I would take a family vacation down to Key West, and we'd always go snorkeling, and nice. I fell in love with all the fish and everything in the reefs, and it was right when underwater disposable cameras were becoming popular.
Yes.
And so I saved my allowance when I had this little piggy bank all year. I would find change in the couch for my dad's, that you'd sit down and his change would fall into the couch, and I
Yeah.
would get all those change, and then I would go and I would get my money for it, and that would be my allowance money for this trip. And I bought a fish identification book to take down with me, and I was so excited. And so I spent the entire 8-hour drive reading through this book, not understanding some of it, because I was very young, so half the words were jargon to me. But I was looking at the pretty pictures and trying to learn as much as I could. And when we were down there, I started taking pictures of all these fish and playing the matching game in this fish ID book. And I just became so in love with just trying to figure out what they were. And I would read every bit of information that I could understand about these fish. And then I would go and tell my parents about it. And then we would go out snorkeling, and I would come up to the surface and I'd be like, hey, did you see that blue parrotfish? The blue parrotfish, eats, you can hear it because it has a beak and it's eating, organisms about the coral. I would just go into these spiels as a kid talking about, all the different fish I was seeing. And I subconsciously at that age kind of knew that was going to be my progression. And I think my parents really knew that that was what the rest of my life was going to look like.
Yeah.
And it
How old were you at that point?
It probably started at like 4 or 5 and went up to like,
awesome. That is so cool.
Yeah, it was, we went every year, and every year I would learn something new and I would find new fish. And, we went to the dry Tortugas, and I'll never forget, I actually have a couple hogfish. So hogfish have become one of my favorite fish because at this one moment, I dove down, and it was sitting there and it opened, and they had a very large mouth, and it freaked me out for a second when I was a kid. And so I swam to the surface, and I was panicking, and my mom was panicking. She couldn't figure out what was going on. And I tried to tell her this fish yawned at me and had these giant teeth, and they had 2, giant canines. But at the time I didn't know. Yeah. And so we get back, back to the hotel, and I'm flipping through the book trying to find this fish. And she's like, no, it doesn't have any teeth. It's, but don't worry about it. And she was just trying to calm me down. She knew what it was, but she was trying to calm me down.
Yeah.
She was like, don't worry. And then I find it, and it said, 2 large canines. And I'm pointing to the book, and I'm like, see, they have teeth.
I'm not crazy. Yeah. They have teeth. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I did that for so many years, and, not realizing that my life would end up being just that. And another part was like, I always loved, the movies, like The Living Seas. I was mesmerized by that. Because it talked about all these different aspects of the marine science world, and it explored, more uncharted areas. And I just remember I would watch that, and the Sting soundtrack, even to this day, I listen to that song Fragile by Sting, and I'm like transported back to being a kid sitting in front of the TV watching this. So I was influenced by so many different things, and one that's really deeply connected to me is my grandfather. I think I mentioned this briefly in my email to you.
Yes.
But my grandfather was a submariner with the U.S. Navy. They were coming back from the Mediterranean, and the Navy lost communication with them. They were about a day out of Norfolk. They were about 100 miles, I think, southwest of the Azores. And it was on May 22nd, and they lost all communication. And it wasn't until about a week later that they were officially announced lost at sea. My mother was 2 years old. My uncle was 5. So my grandmother had 2 very young children.
Yeah.
And so it was very hard for her. And she never remarried. She always wore her wedding ring. But she always talked so fondly about him. And I know, like, we've always stayed connected through memorial groups with the Scorpion. That was the sub that he was on. And she'd always tell me stories growing up of how much he loved the sea and he loved history, and he was planning this sailing trip around the world, and he had these maps and he was chartering it. He had a sextant, and he was learning how to, navigate using the stars. I actually have the sextant that he used. Cool. He was trying to, learn on. And she'd always told me that I had his spirit. She's always said that I feel like I'm talking to George again. She's like, when I talk to you and I see how you light up when you talk about the ocean or you're talking about these fish, she's like, I see him through you. And so that growing up and not knowing this person and knowing that I would have loved this person, we would have been 2 peas in a pod, but just still feeling connected to someone I've never met. But because we shared so many similar interests and loves for the ocean and learning and history and just being surrounded by the ocean. So I think with all those factors of just growing up and being surrounded by the ocean and the sea and learning, my natural progression into marine science was just always going to be there. And I knew that that was my passion. They always say, you never work a day in your life if you truly love what you do. And I
Yeah.
truly love what I do. Like every day, there are days when I've been in the mud
Oh
and
yeah.
I'm looking at myself going, what am I doing? Why am I here? But then there are days I'm out at sea and
Yeah.
I've been out for, days on end and it's a beautiful sunset and I'm just sitting there looking out and I'm 100 miles offshore and, the stars come out at night and I'm like, wow, like this is my job.
Yeah.
I am getting paid to do what people pay to do. And
Yeah.
I get to see things that people don't normally get to see or,
For
interact
sure.
with animals that you don't normally get to interact with. So that's just kind of how my life has led me up into this point. So I think I'm very fortunate in that, but that's kind of my story.
I
And I
love it.
feel like that's why I'm here.
Well, I love it. I love, you can obviously see the passion, through just the story that you told. It's amazing. It's shared by a lot of marine biologists, like who get to the point where you're at, which is not easy. Let's be honest. It's not an easy road. We talk about passion. We talk about how that takes you, and it does take you far. It does take you through the hard times. It does take you through the nights of studying, the staying up late, the long days at sea. Those are never easy. Sometimes the sea works with you and sometimes it works against you. And it can be dangerous and you have to be careful. And so there's a lot of things that go with the job, like any job, where there's some good days and some bad days and so forth. But to get to where you are, like I mentioned before, is not easy. The schooling can be difficult. Just getting in to university in college can be difficult. Going through college, in a marine biology program is difficult, right? Getting that job afterwards is not easy. You have to be vigilant. You have to be connected. You have to have a network. I talk about this all the time. Was there, and knowing since you were like 4 or 5 that you had this passion in you, I had it when I was 14. That's when I realized like I wanted to be a marine biologist. Were there any points in that time where you wavered, once you discovered like, hey, well, I guess the first thing, when did you discover that you could do this for a living and get paid to do this? And then were there any of those at any point in time during schooling, whether it be high school, whether it be university, that you struggled at and you were like, maybe this isn't for me?
I would say there was never a time that I was like, this is not for me, but there were
Mm-hmm.
times where I thought, can I really do this? And
Right.
I found it early on, because my parents, they were my dad was in the Navy. So I mean, my parents grew up around the ocean, so I knew that jobs in the marine world were there.
Okay.
I didn't know how many. I didn't learn about how vast the industry really is. You always think about a dolphin trainer or,
Yeah.
being working in an aquarium, which are
Yeah.
amazing
Mm-hmm.
positions, but those are the only two that when you grow up that you think of. And
Yes.
they don't tell you all the small, that you could be working with just plankton. You could be working with mollusks. You could go into the private sector. You could be in academia. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
things that you just aren't aware of unless you are exposed to that. And that usually happens in university.
For sure.
So I didn't know about options in the marine science world until high school and into university. But I will say that I have had many people, not necessarily family, just people that were outsider, and I would talk to them about like my jobs or even people in college and in some in high school, and I would be like, yeah, I really want to be a marine biologist, and they'd go, so does everyone else. Find something else. It's every 90s child's,
Yes.
dream with your Lisa Frank dolphin folders. Everyone wants to be a marine biologist.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people didn't realize that, didn't really know my backstory and just how I grew up. That was what everyone wanted to do as a kid, and especially in Florida.
Yeah.
So I think hearing that early on wasn't too bad, but it was really when I got into university when I had some people that were in the, professors, and they would be like kind of warning you against it because and it doesn't pay all that well. I mean, the main thing
Right.
is marine science is usually underfunded. You're always
Yeah.
applying for grants. You're always trying to find funding. And so
Mm-hmm.
finding stable funds and stable grants, especially in academia, is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So they always warn you about that. Like, hey, you might not have if you go into finance, if you go into business, or you go into, marketing, accounting, you're going to have a salary, you're going to have a set paycheck, no matter what, nothing
Mm-hmm.
is necessarily changing per se. But in marine science, depending on what sector you're in, you're kind of reliant on your grants. You're reliant on the
So
funding
true.
coming in. And so there is that level of uncertainty as, am I going to have money in a year? Is
Yeah.
this project going to be funded in the next few years? Like, yeah, right now it's great, but when it's up and I need to reapply, is it going to be as readily available? So
Yeah.
those are the things I think people were warning me about that you don't, again, truly know until you're really in it. But there was a few times where I would say like discouraged, where I was like, I'm a little nervous. But there's a few times that, people will be like, especially with shark biology, everyone wants to work with sharks. They
Yeah.
are the charismatic megafauna,
Yeah.
especially with all the TV shows.
Oh
They
yeah.
they get, they're the shiny, the
Yes.
impressive things, which they are, but
Oh yeah.
everyone wants to do it. And
Yeah.
so as you move through the field, you get people that are like, find backup plans, and everyone that on your other podcast, like the Beyond Jaws one,
Yes.
everyone's always like, my path to sharks was never a direct line. And there may be a handful. There's always the few
Yes.
that just were able to do it, but it's usually some windy road. And so I think a lot of people were trying to tell me that. And, when you're early on in your career, you think, well, if I want to work with sharks, everything has to be sharks. Or I want to work with, this certain type of fish, everything
Yeah.
has to be this. Otherwise, I'm not going to be an expert in this. But
Right.
the reality of it is you're more well-rounded when you can kind of move in between animals or, just different projects that might not
Right.
be like, I said, most of my work is in fisheries. It's not necessarily like, quote unquote
Yes.
shark biology.
Yep.
Um, but I've kind of been able to maneuver my way, and I've come back to sharks.
Yeah.
So I think the moment, there was a few times early on where I was discouraged, where I was thinking that, oh, maybe I'll never get a chance to work with sharks, or I'll never get a
Hmm.
chance to be in this field because, everything seems so uncertain. But I just kind of used those things as, turned them into motivators when people were like, I don't
Yeah.
think you can do it. And I was like, you know what? I can do it, and I'm going to do it.
I like that. And then in some way, you kind of have to prove people wrong because, like, look, anytime you mention anything about, marine biology or really any kind of job as a young person, right? People, there's always going to be doubters. They're like, is this what you really want to do? Like, yeah, it seems fun to be out on the ocean and diving and, sampling and all that kind of stuff, being out in the sun. But is it really, like, is it stable enough? Can you have a good career like you would as a lawyer, as a doctor, or as a marketer or a business person, and all that stuff? And you always get that negative, that negative talk, right? And I always tell people, I had a friend, a friend of mine, I presented in front of his class, and one of the classmates was just like, yeah, like how do you deal with that? And I'm just like, if you want it, go for it. Like, try it. You're young, try it. Like, if it doesn't work out, pivot. You can always go back to school, or you can always do something and work with something. Like, you'll have a degree. You'll have a university degree, and you'll be able to pivot. I've done it a couple of times. I'm doing it right now, and you'll be able to figure it out. But you got to try it, or else you're just going to regret it for the rest of your life, right? And it's just, you have to almost tell them, like, throw it back in their face, like, you know what, I'm doing it, and I'm having a blast. You're clearly having a blast doing this type of work, and you can just be like, look, I'm out in the sun, getting paid to do this. This is a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot, and I feel as though there is, and you can answer this too. For me, there's a lot more to marine biology than just having a stable income. Obviously, that matters, but if you look at any job, nothing's stable these days. You can get laid off, whether you're in these days, whether you're in the private sector or government, which used to be stable, and it doesn't matter where you're from in whatever country, this can happen. So you never know what's going to be secure. You might as well do something you love, or else you're not going to love. Life is going to be boring. And so, do you feel in a way like you got to just try it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that was kind of what my thought process was, why not? If I don't
Yeah.
try it, I'll never know if I get it. But if I try and I get it, then it was all worth it. And if not, I'd learned something along the way. It was a fun journey, and I can say I tried, and there's no regret later on and being like,
Right.
well, I probably should have tried it. Who knows? So I would rather just give it a shot, give it the best I can, and just see where it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that aspect. Working in fisheries and working in marine biology is always fun. And in science, just in general, it's fun because, like, I've talked to a lot of people, whether it be on this podcast or the Beyond Jaws podcast. I'm not like, there's some people who have gone through their career. They've gone through, like, some of the people we've had, like they've been in 35 years plus of fisheries or marine biology or sharks or whatever that might be. But some of the pivots that they've taken within the field have really come from like a question, like a scientific question. Like they want to know more about predator prey dynamics. So they want to know more about like conservation or exploring how many species can they identify and discover, right? As my co-host does, Dr. David Ebert. Do you have one of those? Like, is there something that like, I know you're doing a master, so that's probably your focus right now, but overall, are there specific questions that you're curious about that will drive you, whether you're working on sharks or fish or mammals or whatever?
I wouldn't say like a specific question to a project. I mean, I have tons of those,
Yeah.
but in a general sense, I think and I think it comes with everyone else and people you've interviewed, starts with like a passion. Like we
Mm,
obviously love this and there's something that draws us to it. So we have a connection with it. And then it's the curiosity part. We
mm,
when we see how many questions you can ask, and it's that thing where it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I
yeah.
think that's the exciting part about science, and a part of us that gets excited when we're like, we learn more and then we're like, oh, well, what about this? Well, what about that?
Yeah.
How can this
Yeah.
happen? So the questions start pouring in. And I think that is the excitement part. And it draws us into more and more projects and it makes us want to do more and more work because we want to just understand our world, you know,
Hmm.
as as things are kind of constantly changing with the environment and we want to understand these changes. And if we start now, we've done a really good job in the past few decades. In the future, hopefully we'll have these long-term data sets that, we can watch these changes through time and understand these environmental changes. We talk about climate change all the time. It's so hard to look at climate change on such a small scale. You need such a
So small.
long-term. So I think as a scientist, we get excited because if we start things now for the future generations, we can have these data sets, we can watch them change. So those big picture questions that we are currently trying to ask and answer, might not be able to answer in our lifetime, but we're setting it up for the future to be able to answer those questions. So I think that's also, it's like we're trying to make our world a better
Hmm.
place. It starts at a curiosity of just learning more, but then it's also that drive to wanting to conserve and protect what we have now and then make the world better for the future generations.
I love that. That's awesome. I love that motto. Like just figure out how to make the world better. Like no matter what, like just figure it out. And you have these certain questions. I mean, I know as a marine biologist, we always have questions. We're always trying to figure out something. It doesn't matter whether it's with fish or outside. You're just kind of like, I wonder how I would do that. And then you start going through like the study design and everything and all that stuff. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. My daughter right now is wants to be. She's in last year of high school. She's a senior. And she wants to go into wildlife biology. I'm like, not marine biology. I'm like, nobody's perfect. That's fine. I get it. You can go on land animals, but now I'm starting to like think about it. I'm starting to, we're starting to ask each other questions. Like, I wonder what would happen to this. How would we design this study to figure it out? So introducing like statistics and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun to even just think about those questions. And, talking about school, like you're working, full time, you had your undergraduate degree, you get this job. It's wonderful. What made you decide to have this crazy idea of going back to school? What was what was the trigger for that? Like what made you ignite that? Oh, I want to go back. Did you always want to go back for graduate school?
I'd always wanted to go back.
Yeah.
I definitely took an untraditional route. So I graduated in 2016 with my undergraduate, and then I got my job and I was working there. And I know I wanted to go back, but I really wanted to get some real world like experience in the field. And I was trying to also set myself apart from some of the other applicants. So I know going into marine science, especially when you're going into grad school, you have to be competitive. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people, there's a lot of amazing, smart people. So I was trying to find a way to set myself apart. So my thought process was I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to kind of reframe myself, kind of get back into the mindset. I'm going to work as hard as I can, learn as much as I can through this job. And then I can go back to grad school and I can apply what I learned in my
Yep.
job to the grad school. And, maybe it'll help me because these concepts are not just in the textbook. I've seen the concepts in real life. I've seen them applied. So I thought that maybe would also just help me in general.
For sure.
So I went back to grad school in 2021, and it was kind of during COVID when I kind of made this decision, like this is the time because what else was I going to do? I needed to study for the GRE and everything was closed. So I
Yeah,
might as
had
well
that
buy the
time.
textbook and start studying. And so that was kind of that moment where I was like, all right, this is the
Yeah.
time. Like the world, even though this is terrible, it's kind of setting me up to kind of give me the right time to give myself to study, get into a
Yeah.
university and kind of figure out, the next steps from there.
I think that's great. I mean, it was a great time to do it because everybody had extra time, right? We're all either stuck at home or, things are a little bit more limited to where you can go and whether you want to be limited or not, everybody had that decision to make. And I think it's a great opportunity. When I always said, like, when recessions hit and stuff like that, and you have the chance, like, try and do something extra, go back to school, get it like a diploma or get like a degree or even get, just go back and get like a project management, diploma or whatever that is, certificate, and then try and just get a little higher in that education to set yourself apart. I really like that knowledge. Before we just go into the graduate side and how you balance that, can you talk a little bit about like the methods you use to get your first job, like out of university? Because a lot of people struggle with
Mhm.
getting that job, right? People all the time is like, I've just graduated, I've undergrad, I don't necessarily want to go back to do a graduate degree, but God, I can't get somebody to answer my application. Like I can't get an interview. Did you do anything that you particularly like realized like, oh, this actually really helped? Or did you have a network that helped you get that job? Like, what did you feel you did to get that interview, to get that job?
So a few things. First off, I will say I also struggled. I had 2 years where I
Oh, wow.
graduated, I got my degree, and I was actively searching for jobs. I was bartending at the time. I was
Hmm.
working odd jobs to, save up some money. And there was a point where I got discouraged, but I had reached out. I had some networks that I created during my undergrad. And I was very involved in the university and
Yeah.
in biology club, and I was an officer in there, and I had, I did undergrad research, so I had a lot of connections, and obviously people had moved on, but I started reaching out to people, and a friend of mine, Jordy, who actually worked for the agency, I reached out to her and we were talking, and she said that this group was looking for volunteers, and
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to have, the I guess the network within the area,
Yeah.
but also have being able to volunteer. And I know I always say the best way to really get a job, especially in this field, is volunteer. But
Yes.
even that, I know, it's privilege in itself because not everyone can work for free. I
For
mean,
sure.
it's so hard because, I always say even just a few hours a day, if you can
Mm.
find it, is
Hmm.
better than nothing.
Hmm.
I kind of just gave up my weekends. So I was
Yep.
bartending the weekends, but my quote unquote weekends during the day, I just volunteered. So I volunteered for about 6 to 8 hours a day for 2 times a week for a few months. And it was basically just training for the job.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, I'm like, if you can volunteer at several different places, just if you don't really know what you want to do, and you have the ability, try to find some places and, give it a month or a few months, or just let them know that you're just trying to figure out some things, but you want to, give them your time and learn from them. But just explore, like the time to volunteer is a time to explore, and you can figure out
Hmm.
if you want to be a zookeeper, if you want to work in the aquariums, you want to do husbandry.
Hmm.
Because for me, I did an internship and I realized that husbandry full time wasn't for me. I loved husbandry, but just
Yeah.
full time,
Wasn't your passion. Yeah.
I wanted more research. So I knew that I needed to add that in there, but I wouldn't have known unless I tried. So I
Yeah.
think doing the internships and volunteering was just, it set me up to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was also giving me skill sets that I could then apply for the job applications and or give me an in with someone. Was once a job opened up, and if I was in an internship or a volunteer position, I was basically trained for the job. So when I would, instead of having to hire someone that had never been familiar with their protocols and their procedures, I had been for months. So it was a natural progression into a position. But I know with like internships, I did one paid one through Mote Marine. It was a USF Mote Marine collab, but it was very similar to the RU program. I always tell like students that are
Yeah.
undergrads, I said, look at the RU program. It is a paid internship program funded through the NSF grants. And I was like, it's a great time because you get to do a full research project. You do a proposal, you do the research, you are basically a lab tech that entire time.
Yep.
You go in the field and you do a full poster presentation and basically like a manuscript at the end.
Yeah.
Publishing is dependent on,
Yep.
the advisor, but it
Of
gives
course.
you a chance to really see what research is from start to finish and, determine if do you like research. I've had friends that have done it and been like, research isn't for me. I rather, go into teaching or do consulting. So I always say like those are the opportunities when you can get paid to do it. You can experience what research is like from a start to finish standpoint, and then be able to come out of that with a really good skill set and kind of set yourself up for these jobs, because then you've also broadened your network by just working with all these people.
Yeah, it's amazing. And also, like when you work for, like when you volunteer in a lab, like the RU program or any other lab, you work on multiple projects. You learn how to use different instrumentation. You learn different methods of an analysis and statistics and all that. And you really get that experience. So I love that. I love how you volunteered. And I think, volunteering's got a bad rap over the last decade because there's been a lot of, and I call them like predatory organizations where you have to pay to do the work for them, which I don't like. I really feel like that is detrimental to not only being a marine biologist, but just the work in general. But I like what you did is like, look, I'm not saying this is not easy. You worked all day in the field and then you go bartend at night, like on the weekends. That's not easy. I don't care what anybody says. That's tiring stuff. But you did it because you loved it. You did it because you wanted to do it. And that was the one way that you could do it. Obviously, if you could apply, get an interview and get the job right away, that would have been great too. But sometimes it just doesn't happen. For a lot of us, it just doesn't happen. Volunteering gives the team a chance to get to know you. Are you good with the team? Do you fit in with the team? Are you hardworking? That shows you have, it's like a long-term interview that shows them what you can do. And I think, and shows the passion going at that extra little mile and to put in, a number of hours on the weekend for a couple of months or 3 or 4 months or whatever that might be. And then you get a job it's worth it. And even if it's not, at least you got the experience and maybe get a reference from someone else, right? That's the power of networking and the power of putting yourself out there. And what was nice is you didn't have to pay to do it. You didn't have to go away to do it. It was right in your backyard. So that helped too. I think that was really good. And then of course, showing how good you are and how excited you are to do the work. And like I said, working in the field is never easy at all. And so to show that you can do it and you enjoy it, I think that's really helpful. So that's great. So let's go back to masters and job. Those are not easy to do. We talked earlier, you married them together by, doing a project that I assume was part of some of the work that you were doing, or maybe a project that was going to happen. Can you just talk a little bit about how the project got married together with the masters?
So it was kind of unintentional.
Okay.
I applied to the university knowing that there was a field lab up in the region, but didn't know if it was going to work. I was just going to make it work however I can. If I was like, if I need to bump down to part-time I was just going to figure it out.
Gotcha.
But I really liked the program at Jacksonville University. And I will say what drew me in was white sharks. That
yeah,
not very often you get a chance to work with them. And I saw it and I was like, wow. And I had been following OSEARCH since I was a kid, watching them on TV and show, and I was like, wow, a chance to work with these large individuals that I would never get a chance to even be near. And then, working with this organization where I could learn so much from so many different people and go to school. I was like, this seems too good to be true, but I was like, let me go for it. So I applied and I got in. And I will say with JUs, you don't go in with a project. You spend your first semester meeting with professors and kind of figuring out projects and what's a good fit for you and who is taking students. So that was also nerve-wracking because I didn't know if I was going to get the project that I necessarily, wanted. Right. So, but it worked out because and the main reason when I was thinking about this particular project and this university for grad school is I really wanted a data-heavy thesis. So I had a lot of field work through my normal work, but I was more of a field biologist. I was doing, some analyses, but I'm more in the field. I mean, inshore and offshore. But the analysis side, I could tell was where I was lacking. And I needed something for grad school. I was like, this is the time to kind of bring that up to make me more of a well-rounded scientist. Yeah. And so with that project, through when I was using the OSEARCH data, it is all tag data. So it is all analyses. And so it worked out because the field time was more limited to certain expeditions based on, time of year. But the nitty gritty of the thesis is sitting in front of a computer and learning R code and, manipulating the tag data and learning GIS. And that was what I wanted. So it happened to work out that what I was looking for out of a master's kind of presented itself at this university and kind of gave me a chance. And I think because I had the field experience prior, that this was a good project for me, and it gave me that ability to get this project, because most times in a master's you're trying to get that field experience, but I already had it. So this kind of set me up in a unique way. So my work has nothing to do with my master's thesis in any way. There's almost no overlap except for the university, and my office is in the same building. That is the only overlap. And I didn't know they were in the same building until I showed up for orientation. And I was walking down the hallway and I went,
this is familiar.
I guess this is my new office.
That's awesome. And I think there's something to be said too, when you have all that fieldwork experience. You've worked so I assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were probably working at your job for about 7 or 8 years, and then when you started your master's, is that what we're looking at? 2016, in and around that time?
2016. I started technically in 2018. So I graduated, did the 2 years off, 2018. I think it was 3.5, 3-ish years.
Yeah. Which is a good amount of field experience, especially if you're in the field most of the time. In Florida, you can be in the field all year long, not like here in Ontario, where if you're in the field all year long, you are miserable for about 4 to 6 months out of that year. But regardless, you're in the field, you got lots of field experience, and then you get to do everything on in front of a computer, right? Multiple monitors, looking at GIS, looking at spatial analysis. Now, again, I say field work is hard until you have to learn R code. It's probably, it's like, for graduate students, like torture, and watching graduate students go through it, as I have in the past and gone through it myself. It is like crying frustrating at times. Like, there's tears. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your gender. You're going to cry at some point in front of that computer because this code is not working. Especially, I bought the spatial analysis R code book before I learned R, and I looked at it. I'm like, this is a different language. I don't know what this is. Like, it is hard, right? I'm a GIS analyst as well, and so I learned a lot on that. And once you said, oh yeah, I got tag data like for decades of work for white sharks, that got my GIS going. Like, I was like, okay, you're set. Like, you've got a cool species, obviously iconic, and then being able to discover and identify spatial patterns that we've discovered over the last decade of this great white population that basically comes down to Jacksonville in the winter and then goes. Is it Jacksonville? Does it come as far down as Jacksonville, or does it go to Carolinas?
They go into, so their overwintering region ranges from the Carolinas, so the North Carolina, especially the Outer Banks, all the way along Florida into the Gulf. So they can even
do go to the Gulf. Yeah.
The furthest point and through the OSearch tag telemetry is almost near Texas. It's only a few points. A lot of them will hang out near Louisiana, but we do see them all the way. And recently they found out about 50% of the tagged individuals that they have actually make their way into the Gulf, which I didn't know. I mean, we didn't know up until not that long ago. There's another project going on through a university. I can't remember which one, but yeah, they're working on that right now, which is super cool. I remember even 6 years ago thinking that white sharks came to Florida was huge. I was like, that's got to be an anomaly. There's no way. Yeah. And then as more tag data, has become readily available and the technologies have increased, we have a better chance. And now we realize they're along Florida all throughout the winter. I mean, the Carolinas, they use that coastline back and forth all the time. And we don't, and the thing is, there's a lot of research being done in that New England and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland area. But this southeast part of the United States, we're beginning to get more data on. And that's kind of where my thesis comes in, is we're beginning to kind of get a better idea of how they're utilizing this area and to kind of understand their more fine scale movements. And then that we can begin to answer these questions and to understand how are they using these areas? What are they doing while they're here? What are their diving profiles look like? Because we don't have the information that we have here as they do up in the north.
Kenzie, that is so freaking cool. If you think about I know we're geeking out here, but this is so cool to be able, like the white shark, like Jaws, you know, everybody's afraid of it. You know, there's a whole history behind. I think we're hitting 50 years of Jaws in June this year. And you get to discover, like, in the 50th year of Jaws, that there's like what they're doing in this area that really we haven't known ever. You know, that is so cool because, you know, down the road, 10 years, 20 years down the road, you're going to tell people like, yeah, I helped figure this out. Like that was my master's.
I mean,
like,
my
no
master's,
bragging, but that was my master's.
Unfortunately, I don't have like amazing data in a sense that like I am not answering all of these like massive random questions, but I like to think that I'm a part of the stepping stones and the building blocks to kind of understanding their movements while they're down here. And so that's kind of cool to kind of be a part of that story. And as we learn more, I can know that like I played my part in that. So like what you were saying, yeah. But I wish I could answer some of these bigger, like, you know, under like questions that we're always asking, you know, where are they mating? You know, what are they eating when they're down there? Are they targeting certain areas? Are there hot spots? There's like so much we want to know. And that's like when you're talking about questions, like my mind just starts reeling. And I'm like, even with the masters, you know, my advisor, he always tells me, he's like, reel it in. You know, like, remember the scope of your masters, because I would have turned it into
a PhD too quickly.
Mind you, I'm trying to go for a PhD, but I mean, not at the university. They don't have a PhD, but I was naturally just turning it into, and you know, the curiosity there, which is great. But again, you have to like reel yourself in, remind yourself, like focus on your questions at hand, because when you have too many questions, you're never going to answer anything because you have so many going on. You have to like focus at like the foundation, get that done, and then if more projects come out of that, great. But let's get the masters, let's get that foundation project done, and then we can go from there.
It's the research ADHD. I think every student, I went through it, every student goes, because you're asking all these questions, like, what about this? What about this? Can we figure out this? And then every supervisor's like, hold on a second. Like, let's focus on finishing your master's. Then we'll discuss other papers and other questions. And I think it's awesome. Like, it's awesome to see, because that's when the passion hits, right? That's when, you know, like research is for me, like research is here. Like I've hit the jackpot in terms of what I want to learn and, you know, what I want to find out and what I want to tell the world, like the story to tell the world. It is a story is essentially what you're saying, but you're using math to kind of figure it out, you know, and geolocation to figure it out. So I just love that. I think it's cool. And to be honest, like, speaking of storytelling, you're doing a full-time job, you're doing a master's, and then you've taken it upon yourself to be like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it to the public. Like, let's just go on social media and I'll you know, riff on some videos and I'll just publish them so that people can get to know, one, what I do, but also what I love, what you were doing with your parents back when you were 4 or 5 years old, snorkeling in the Keys and being like, hey, have you seen this, like, you know, blue parrotfish? Like, it eats algae and it does this. You're telling that to the people. Obviously, you're busy with a lot of things. What made you decide to be like, look, I'm going to start talking about not only the work that I'm doing, but also just science in general and marine biology and ocean in general?
There's a few things. One is more of just a funnier reason, is because I always said I love learning. I think it's just in all of us scientists. But, you know, we'll be in a conversation and someone's talking about something and then I know a fun fact and I'm like, ooh, fun fact. And so, like, I love just like talking about things that I found out, you know, if it's through a paper or, you know, news article or, you know, journal. Like, I love to just share the information. You know, my friends share similar interests. And so we always kind of do this back and forth. And I thought about, why not just do this to the everyday public? And I do it with like my friends and family who are not even in this field. Yeah. And, you know, all of a sudden I start chatting, and next thing I know, like, I've given a full 45-minute lecture on some random topic. And I was like, why don't I just do this for everyone? You know, why don't I like make this accessible? And I think, you know, I always felt education is so important because it was so inspiring to me. And I had teachers growing up that made science fun and engaging. And I always wanted to kind of be a part of that, because I feel like when science, it can be boring, it can be tough, it can be frustrating. But I think when you make it fun and engaging and you get excited about things, you're going to want to learn more. And I think that's so important, is like, again, fostering this curiosity, even if it doesn't have to be about marine science, but just in general, like just always questioning and asking looking at the world and, through different eyes and, different perspectives. So I kind of really wanted to, one, just have fun with it, but
Mm-hmm.
also just bring out fun facts because,
Yeah.
sometimes I have a bunch of fun facts about random fish that people have never heard of. And then they get excited and they're like, oh, I've never heard about it. What's that fish? And I'm hoping that by kind of getting them excited and showing them something that they've never seen before, that they're more likely to go research it themselves or
Mm-hmm.
tell someone else about it, or when they see an article or hear it around town, they'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, I actually have a fun fact about that, and then they'll start talking. So it just helps spread education and knowledge, which I think is just, it's so vital right now. And I
Yeah.
just, and again, and making it accessible because, marine science can be so limiting to, certain groups or, especially
For
being
sure.
around Florida, like a lot of
Yeah.
people in the middle of the United States and landlocked states that, don't have access to the beach 30 minutes down the road.
For
And
sure.
so some of these marine science classes aren't available because the water's not there. And so it's only when they come down to these states. But when with social media, we have a way to access the entire world. And so it's always good to kind of just put it out there. And so that was kind of my thought process was, I love talking about science. I love educating people. Why not do it
Yeah.
through social media and use the internet as like the best educational tool that there is right now?
You are preaching to the choir, my friend. You are
Yeah.
preaching to the choir. And I love that though. But I think that's the thing is it's fun for you. Again, it's fun for you. You're already doing it with your family and friends, right? And maybe after a while your family and friends are like, okay, Kenzie, like hold your horses. That happens
All
to
the
me.
time.
Like my wife will just like glaze over and be like, okay, Andrew, get it out of your system and move on. But that's the thing. You go to people like you don't know who you're gonna do it. So is that what like when you like what was the goal? Like because like let's be honest, like social media is its own thing. Content creation is its own thing. People make their living off of content creation. Some even that are like marine biologists make like, they'll have like, there's a creator fund for each platform and stuff, and they could make money off of this. What was your goal when you started? Like you picked TikTok, right? Obviously, like I assume pandemic, TikTok started to blow up. You started to see it like, hey, let's start using it. It's a fun platform. What was the goal when you first started? Was it to get as many followers as possible? Was it to get like big, that kind of stuff? What was the goal?
So, I mean, it's natural to want followers and a big following, but
Yeah.
that wasn't the push. That wasn't the reasoning behind it. The followers would just be an added bonus to get the information out to a broader audience.
Yeah.
I just wanted to promote science. I just wanted to talk. I wanted to get it out there. And I always worry about, the being on social. I was so skeptical about doing this for so long. So I
Mm-hmm.
never wanted someone to think that I was doing it strictly for the money or to be
Right.
some type of influencer or personality.
Mm.
That's not the goal. If they were something to come up because of being on social media, great. That's just a bonus.
Yeah.
But that's not the root of it. That's not the reason why I was doing it. I wanted to do it because I loved it. And I think, we have misinformation can be spread so easily. So I
Mm.
want to be a part of the people that are spreading correct information and showing people how to research, how to look for, information that's, incorrect, or be able
Yeah.
to question things and be like,
Yeah.
well, that sounds a little odd. Let me look this up, or, oh, that's a neat fact. Let me look this up. So I just wanted to be part of the push to just promote more learning. And so
Mm-hmm.
like the follower thing, I picked TikTok just because it was so easily accessible to so many people without necessarily having to have followers. Like if you have a Facebook or an Instagram, they usually have to follow you for you to
Yes.
pop up on their
Right.
like page or their feed. But with TikTok, they can
Mm-hmm.
follow you so they can see more of your stuff, but your videos just get sent out to the world. And
Yeah.
so I
It's like a
think
little
that would,
experiment in front of everybody, right? Yeah.
yeah, and it's nerve-wracking knowing that you're putting yourself out there for millions of people to critique and
Yeah.
criticize and question you. And so you have to like take that in consideration. You're like, are you prepared for people to question you, or they might make fun of you, for
Yeah.
whatever reason. So
Yep.
you gotta have, it's like a mental preparation, but also there was another part of it that I thought it would be a good practice for me. As a scientist and educator, I always feel like it's important to be able to relay science to all audiences. So we
Mm-hmm.
go to conferences and we use all the scientific jargon and we talk to people that are experts in what we do, and that's great. But we need to be able to take that to the public, because if the public gets excited, we get more people excited. That means usually more funding for us to do more work.
It's true. It's
So,
true.
so when more people know about it, more people are like, well, yeah, I'll donate to that. Or yeah, I'm more likely to help pay for that. Or I'm more,
Hmm.
it creates just a better system overall.
Yeah.
But I just, I think being able to also explain concepts to experts,
Hmm.
to the general public, and to children just makes almost solidifies concepts in your head and makes you understand, like,
Yes.
do I actually really know what I'm talking about? I know that sounds weird to say, but you get almost regurgitating some of these textbook or scientific article sentences because you're like, all right, this is what it says, and you
Hmm.
just say it and you state it, and that's just the fact. But it's not until you're talking to everyday people that don't work in that and don't use those types of terms, or might not know the anatomy of sharks and fish, and so you're talking about cartilaginous fish and elasmobranchs,
Hmm.
looking at the hyoid arch. They don't know what that
No.
means.
No.
So being able to take those higher level concepts that you've become an expert in and then relay them to the general public in a way that they can understand and get excited about was kind of also that push, where it's like, it also helps me practice as a scientist to
Hmm.
really understand the concepts that I'm learning and also researching. So there were so many points to it, but none of it
Hmm.
really ever came from, I want to get famous and I want more followers. That was
That was
never,
not it.
no. I mean, I don't
No.
even have that many followers, and that's fine. I just love doing it. And I think that and I always thought it's my duty as a scientist to educate people and put science out there for everyone. And so I thought, if I am able to inspire or educate a handful of people, even one person, if one person got inspired by a video I made, then I have done my duty as an educator, as a scientist, to, help future generations, or, inspire someone else to kind of learn more or pursue a career.
I love that. I love that. And to kind of push back on your, like, I don't have many followers. I hear this a lot from a lot of people, right? It's like, and I say the same thing. I don't have a lot of followers. Somebody told me this one time, because like when I first started the podcast, I would get like maybe 10 downloads, off the bat. And you're like, oh, nobody's listening to my stuff. Then I get like 50 downloads. I'm like, still complaining because I, hear other Joe Rogan gets 1 million and all this, and everybody thinks that, oh, I should be getting that. Somebody told me this: if you have 100 followers, 100 downloads, and you put 100 people in a classroom, there's standing room only in a classroom, right? Like that's a huge amount of people when you're presenting in front of a classroom, like in person. I'm looking at your profile here on TikTok. You have, at this point, you have 691, and I'm sure that's increasing followers. That's a lecture hall. That's almost 2 lecture halls. That's a huge lecture hall of people that you're teaching each and every time you post that could potentially see it. And if you're on TikTok, as you mentioned, the amount is probably more than that are actually seeing your videos, right? Because it's not just to your followers, it's to everybody. You just never know who you're being presented to. So I want you to think about it that way too. I want everybody to think about that. Like the audience here who are listening is like, you never know who's going to see you. You never know like what impact you might have. And I love that the thought of like, if I can just get one person to really get excited about the ocean, who knows what that person will do with that information? You just never know. You never know who's listening. You never know what they're going to do. And I think that's the power of being a creator and talking about stuff. And we all get criticism. We all get bots. We all get people who take messages, politically and all this kind of stuff. And they don't know really what they're talking about. I had a guy the other day on I forget what platform it was, but talking about the importance of, I did an episode a couple of weeks ago talking about the importance of talking about the ocean, how important it is to talk to your friends and family, as you know, right? You do the same thing. And the guy was like, well, who cares about the ocean? Like there are so many homeless people in California. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I totally get it. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. Like completely different issues, but I get it. Like there's other people have other issues, but and you just never know who you're getting to watch it, what they're going to comment. And you just have to like answer those properly. And I like to try and be nice to everybody. There's some I'm a little more aggressive with, but every once in a while, there's people who are just genuinely worried about other things in the world. And you're like, I get it. I responded. I was like, yeah, I hope you do something about it. Like I would love to hear, I'd love to see what you create online to help with that homeless, because that's obviously something that's important, but not what we're talking about here. So I appreciate the comment, but thank you. But that's, I've also had a lot of people who have changed their lives because of it. They've either gone to do a PhD or they've gone to change and start an organization and all that kind of stuff. So you just never know who's going to listen. And it's also cool, some of the stories you cover. We just talked about this before we press record. And I hope it's okay to talk about this. But one of your recent, I guess it was a series of episodes. You did a couple of parts. I think it was like 4 or 5 parts of this. Could you talk about this recent one? It got a lot of views, like almost 40,000 views on that first video. What was the scenario and why did you feel the need to comment?
So it's so ridiculous, and it always makes me laugh. What gets popular on the internet, and it's always this just strange thing, and it's always the one thing you least expect.
Yeah.
I think I was telling you before this, the videos that I put the time and effort to, do the background research, to find the good images, then to record, and then to edit, they're hours of time and effort. They get views, and I get some comments, and I'm like, yeah, it's awesome. The one that I really wake up in the morning, do a response video to, that took me 5 minutes maximum to do, gets the most views. But the video was, and I'm going to state this video, the statement is fake. It was a created statement. But at the time, I wasn't sure.
Right.
So this woman online stated that she was diving with sharks and was wearing a sequin bikini and had an encounter with the shark. And the internet lost its mind. There was a lot of people that I was kind of happy to see that everyone was like, "What are you doing? You should never do that. You look like a giant fish."
Yeah.
So I was happy to see that people were recognizing, that's probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
So I just commented, one, stating, yes, everyone's saying this is a bad idea. Yes, it is. The sequins reflect the light and they can mimic fish scales. And when you're diving with things that eat fish, you don't want to look like that. And I'm not saying just because she was wearing that initiated that fake interaction.
Right.
But you don't want to put yourself in any way, shape, or form in harm or in a way that could create or allow the interaction to potentially happen. I'm going to say it that way.
Yeah.
So you just want to be cognizant of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I stated that, one, just don't wear that. I would suggest not wearing that. And if you really want to wear it, wear a wetsuit or wear, a sun shirt, wear something that takes away that shine. I stated the same thing with jewelry. It does the same thing. People go swimming with jewelry, and I've actually had more closer interactions with barracuda than I have with sharks. And I've swam with hundreds of sharks, but the few barracuda, they, again, I mentioned my bracelet, keeping it on, and you're sitting there holding it because that little bit of shine kind of looks like a fish scale. And again, even if it's not necessarily looking like a fish, it's something different in the environment that something is going to be curious about, and then go investigate it to figure out what is this.
Yeah.
So you don't want to draw that attention. That's not the attention you're looking for about being in the ocean. And most times for shark biologists, we're going to find sharks, but most people that are swimming in the ocean aren't wanting. They don't want to find them. So I made the video, and I made it a few part series. I wanted to address the video, but then I wanted to bring up some good points because it gave the perfect timing to talk about safe swim practices. Yeah. When you're going on the water, you have to, you're going into another environment. You're going into basically the home of all these animals, including sharks, and you have to be aware of what you're doing, and you want to make sure you are staying safe. The reason we have those flags at the beach, and we have lifeguards, and we have all these signage, just explaining the area, is for information to make sure that you are as safe as a swimmer when you make the decision to get in the water. And so I talked about, not swimming near fishermen. One, you don't want to get caught up in the line. They also have active bait. That bait is in the water, trying to attract everything in that area. The last thing you want to do is be near something that's being attracted to that area. So that's just unsafe. And they're kind of following the same lines. Piers. People are actively fishing all along those piers. You don't want to get, caught up in the lines. And also there's so much fish in the water that, again, it's attracting everything and anything in that area to that region. You don't want to be there. And then marinas, especially, a lot of people don't think, people are not fishing at marinas, but a lot of fishermen come off their boats and fillet their fish and throw in the carcasses. And because after days and days of this, fish and sharks and other marine animals realize this is an area for easy food. So they're more likely to hang out there and be in that area trying to get free food. If you are to get in that water, when they hear that splash, they're not going to be like, oh wait, that's a person. I don't want. They see that, they're
Yeah.
expecting what they've expected for, every day, that it's a fish carcass and they can eat it.
Right.
So
Right.
again, you don't want to put yourself in a situation that could lead to a bad encounter.
Yep.
And then again, just like the sandbars, one that a lot of people don't realize is that sandbars are not a safe place to be. If it's really shallow and you're ankle deep and you can see everything around you, that's fine. But also getting to that sandbar, it usually drops off and there's a dip, and the same thing, it falls off. And usually in those channels are a lot of bait fish runs. And what usually follow bait fish? Larger fish and sharks. And again, you don't want to put yourself in that situation while you are in the middle of a bait fish run while something is actively feeding. They're not targeting you, they're targeting that fish, but you are now caught up in that. And that's usually when those encounters happen. So I really wanted to highlight these examples and been like, hey, this is a bad scenario. I'm glad it was fake. I'm glad she's okay. But let's put out some reminders of when you're in the ocean, you are in a new environment and you have to be aware of your surroundings, and also talk to local people. A lot of people that go and travel, there are certain areas I tell you not to swim because, again, people could be filleting carcasses and, putting things in the water. There could just be a lot of just fish. You just never know. And you want to make sure when you're traveling and you're going swimming in an area that's not a common swimming area, that that area is okay. And there's nothing in that area that could create a scenario that would be negative. So I just thought that was a good time to kind of bring up these points. And again, I was so happy that those videos actually did well, but it was funny that they took 5 minutes to make, of just being like, hey, don't do this, do this. And, I'm glad she's safe, but just don't wear a sequin bikini.
that's just life lesson here. Just don't wear a sequin in the ocean. But that's what I find so ironic, I think, with a lot of people who, when we do stuff like this, when we do create content, and we're scientists, so we want to prepare. We want to make sure that, one, we're factually correct. We double check, we confirm, and then we present something that's interesting. So we spend a lot of time putting together videos, whether they be 3-minute videos, 10-minute videos, 20-minute videos, whatever that might be. And then they never really take off the way we hope that they would. You might get some views here. You get consistently a good amount of views. But then every once in a while, you'll get one that's just like, hey, I just want to comment on this. And then I just want to see what happens. And all of a sudden 40K, views, all of it. And you're like, what? Are you kidding me? I spent 5 minutes talking about that. But I think the thing is what we don't understand sometimes as scientists is that, and even communicators, that people just want relevant content that's new, that's different, but it's also just simple things that we need to say. You and I, if we had talked about this, just the two of us, just being like, or other scientists around, just being like, yeah, that was not what I would have done. I would not have worn a swim trunks that were sequenced. Probably not the best idea. But to some people, they want to know more about why it's not a good, what's the problem with that? Other than can't be very comfortable, to be honest, a sequenced bikini or any kind of bathing suit that's sequenced. And so you get that, you start to, and then all of a sudden people are like, oh, that's simple information. Okay. I can digest that, no jargon, no facts. It's just, hey, just probably not a good idea. You said it in a nice way. You're very calm. You had your coffee with you. I think that was coffee. You had a coffee mug with you. And you're just like, okay, I got to comment on this. It was a really simplistic, informative, entertaining kind of video that I think people just get behind, right? Sometimes I think we go for so complicated that just the simple videos are necessary to really, I guess, because you had a good story to tell too, but it's it just hits people, that emotion. I just love that aspect of it, right? And you just never know what's going to go, especially in TikTok. It can take off within minutes, and you're just what the heck happened? It's awesome. But I love how you did that story. And it was a number of parts, and it got good views all the way through. And I just love that. I just love that aspect. So, as we kind of wrap up here, the science communication, I feel is never going to go away from you. Something that you've really done. What do you want to do? In the future, this is kind of, you're just scratching the surface right now, I feel. Do you have any plans for science communication? Something that you want to be able to accomplish, trying to manifest and put it out there for us?
So a few things.
Okay.
One, looking at a PhD to kind of continue to go more into science, and I would love to go into academia to kind of continue that science communication, in the college classroom. And I also would like to be able to film my journey, and also like with this podcast, you with the other people that you've interviewed, you show their journey, and everyone's are either different, but there's always so there's similarities, and people might be able to connect and be like, wow, okay, I didn't get a job right away, and neither did she, but she's doing this, so it's possible for me. So there's that aspect. So definitely a PhD and being able to show the journey and show the research, and again, just show research that most people might not ever get a chance to see or didn't even know existed, and get people excited. But in the meantime, I mean, the PhD search is a daunting one. I've been working for hours on top of everything else. In between, I'm like looking up universities and, looking at finding professors, but they don't really tell you how hard it is to really find someone that matches your research interests. That also will give you a chance to broaden your skill set and get you a chance to, work with something that you may not have worked before, or, continue working with what you're working with. But, I don't, with my white shark stuff, like I don't always have to do white sharks. I like the shark stuff, but I would like to, expand on it, work another species, or, I like the tagging and telemetry stuff. So maybe continue that with something different, and then just hone in the skill set, but use it for a, variety of animals, and I can learn about different behaviors. So there's that. But in the meantime, I'm up for an election. So in Florida, we have Florida Marine Science Educators Association. So it's a association for all the educators that teach marine science. I mean, things for all levels. I think primarily it's like more like middle school and high school teachers in it. But I'm up for the Northeast Regional Director position, and I feel like I have a pretty good chance, because I'm the only person on the ballot for that.
So far, nobody else vote. Just go.
But so I mean, I think there's no one else running up against me, so I think I have a pretty good chance. But a friend of mine, Chelsea Shaw, she's the president-elect, so she's starting this coming year. She reached out to me. We both had worked together in the past, and she'd asked me if I wanted to be a part of this. And, part of me was a little nervous, being like, do I add something else to my plate? But it's education, and I'm like, I can spin this into my TikTok, and I already do a lot of education and outreach events personally myself. So I was like, this will just be an extension of that, and kind of give me more chances, or, be able to reach a bigger audience in the educator circle. And so it just basically, I will be helping facilitate events in the area, putting out newsletters about events that pertain to marine science or education in the area, facilitating conferences or just group meetups to make sure that, anyone in the area. And then it also kind of helps me in a way to have more of a board and leadership role that can, again, get me new experiences in that. So that's kind of like my short-term and long-term goals, and what's currently kind of going on to continue this. So even though I'm a researcher, the education part obviously is so important to me. So this educator association kind of gives me that chance to 100%. Do it on a bigger and, again, at a professional level, on top of just the fun TikToks. But I can also use my TikToks in this and promote both the association and just talk about everything. And I think everything is so linked together that I feel like this was a good move, and I hope that people can benefit from this, and I hope that I can bring something new to the table, and that they, I can open the doors for some people, or get people together that are like-minded, and we can, again, help the Northeast Florida portion, of Florida to get just excited about marine science and get more people involved.
I love it. I agree with you. I think it's working. I think you're doing it, and you're getting bigger and bigger things, and I just love it. Kenzie, this has been awesome to have you on the podcast. This is the first, definitely not last time, I'd like to have you on the podcast. I'd love to have you back. And as you do more research, as you do more science communication, whether that be through TikToks, whether it be through like a regional area, and having influence on how kids are being educated, I think it's wonderful to be part of all that aspect. Because I think as scientists, we have this responsibility not only to do really good research and really good science and conservation, but we also have that ability with part of the conservation is to really connect with people. And I think you're doing that in a fantastic way. And it's obviously working, whether you're talking about sequence bikinis or you're talking about, evolutionary advantages that fish can have. I just love it. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And, if people want to get a hold of you, your TikTok is at ken.seas. So Kenzie's, but ken.seas. ken.seas. We'll put the link in the show notes. Is there any other way that you want people to get a hold of you, or?
In case TikTok gets banned for whatever reason,
You
because
never know.
I'm currently in the United States and I know we're the only ones dealing with it. I'm on Blue Sky,
Okay.
and I think there's another. It's called Skylight Social, the new one that just popped up. I just added because it's linked to Blue Sky, so they're kind of interconnected. I will be also starting a educational Instagram, all the same handles. Ken.seas or Ken.seas or Ken-seas. So
Perfect.
you can follow me on all the platforms in that way.
I'll put all those links in the show notes. And I want to thank you again, Kenzie, for coming on the podcast. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you, Kenzie, for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast and sharing your story with the audience. It was great to be able to hear how you started, where you're ending up now, and where you're going to go in the future and your goals. And I think it's amazing. I can't wait to see what you come up with. And I can't wait to have you back on the podcast to talk more about sharks, more about fisheries, more about marine biology and science communication. It's all stuff that, we love to talk about here on the podcast. I think it's really interesting, just from a personal standpoint, our paths have been very similar, just at different times. I'm older than her, much older than her. And, we've had very similar sort of experiences learning GIS and, working right after university and going back and doing graduate school. So we have that experience, and then we have that field experience, and then we're able to do a master's where we're looking at more data intense masters and research compared to field intense masters and research. And so I think it's really cool that we have that similar path, obviously science communication path as well we share. So it was really great to connect with her on that. And I just love to hear that type of story and to know that, not everybody has a unique path. I mean, this is unique in her own right, but it's very similar to a lot of us who are coming out and doing more science communication. I just love to see that and enjoying it, not having crazy goals of earning a ton of money, becoming an influencer, just educating for one person so that they can understand the ocean a little bit better. And that's made her day. I just love that aspect, just keeping it real, keeping it, just right in front of you and just being like, I just want to talk about the ocean because I'm going to do it anyway. I might as well do it on a platform where people can listen. And if they're looking for that type of resource, they've got it. So I'm going to put the links to Kenzie's TikTok, to her new Instagram that's coming out, to Blue Sky in the show notes. Check it out. And I'd love to hear your comment on her career. Are you following a similar path? Do you want to follow a similar path? Hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, or you can hit me up in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. And I would love to hear your thoughts about all of this. So thank you so much, Kenzie, for joining us. And thank you for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.